Hey guys, I am so excited to bring you another one of my tribe members here. Meet Crystal McDaniel.
Hello. Fantastic to be here with you.
I'm so excited. She is, you guys don't know, but like she has hung out here for this podcast all night. She's starving. And she's still here because I think she's the one that loves me the most.
I am.
Don't tell the other girls
I am
that.
the one that loves you the most.
You
So
love
they're
me the
not going to
most.
know that until they listen.
I know
So-
they're going to hear this and then be like, we'll be getting a group text in the message. I was just sitting here because I'm like, okay, let's talk about the first time we met. And obviously you saw me before we met.
Right.
And you said you had a good story. So I can't wait to hear it.
Yeah. So first and foremost, I always joke about how I met you and Dawn. And Dawn is her husband and also who they've grown clinics together. I met Dawn first. And it was because I was interested in competing, and they had just started their cafe on Racing Drive. And I remember every time I would go in there to order food, Dawn was the one always working the front register. And Yvonne has heard this story numerous times, but
Yes.
every time I would go order something, Dawn would grunt whenever you would ask him something. Because I'm pretty sure he struggled talking to people, so he didn't.
Why we put him in the front counter spot, I have no idea.
So for time and time again, I knew who Don was, and I knew he didn't speak very much. And, I would go into it was Gold's at the time. Now it's something different, but Gold's Gym on Racing Drive. And I would see Don and I would see his beautiful wife, which was Yvonne.
Aww.
And I remember one day seeing her on the stair mill and just standing there staring at her. Cause here I was in with my baby goals of competing. And I was looking at Vaughn with all her muscles. She had been competing for years. They had started this cafe, and I was just in awe. And I was terrified to actually go talk to her. I knew who she was, and I knew Dawn was, but I was at that point in me getting into Wilmington, learning to compete, starting to get into weightlifting. I just thought they were the coolest people ever. So I never said anything to you because I was
this is just supposed to be about you, not about me.
Know. But that was how it was. At that time I was getting into bodybuilding and I was getting into healthy eating, and you guys were just who I come across, and I was just in awe. So that is actually I don't even know if you know that.
I don't even know the story.
So that is how I knew who you guys were.
And you waited 12 years to 13 years to tell me this.
It's been 13 years. We've been friends for a while before that, but so that was actually how I remembered meeting you. And it was the same with you've done podcasts with Lauren as well. You guys will hear that in our group podcast as well. But even Lauren, I had hired Lauren for coaching for a few months and had never met her, and I think I just paid her money. She sent me diet, and then many years later, now we're friends. But at the time, we didn't know who each other was. She was just somebody I paid money to for a diet. So
I think that's so cool about our group of friends, which you guys will get to hear, is that we all were on similar paths in the same industry and then ended up in the tribe that we did, which is crazy. I don't know. When you stop and think about how we all got together, it's super weird.
Yep. And we were just talking about this before the show started. I think the first time I actually had an actual conversation with you, we actually lived in, I saw you in the gym.
Did you move neighborhood because I was there? No, you were there first. I'm just kidding you.
But we actually found out we lived in the same townhouse community at the time. Yep. And, after we became friends, you came over for an oyster roast with my boyfriend at the time. And that was the first time we had actually had a conversation. So it's just small world.
That was the first time I ever ate oysters too. I was you guys threw them out on this table, all these steam. I'm how do I eat these? And I didn't know how to shuck them. And you I just remember all your friends looking in, they're where did you come from? And I was Illinois. We didn't have oysters back then. We were eating Rocky Mountain oysters, which came from a different way. But
nope. And we always had people that would go get our oysters. So we had fresh oysters. So it was always fun. It was just a fun time. So, but yeah, so that's actually how we met.
And so I thought that you were a badass because, you were a cop, and you were telling at that party that we were getting to, you were saying how you were going through, I'm probably going to do this wrong, but FBI, right?
Yeah.
Okay. And you were going through all of this whole qualifications with this. But before we get into that story, I know like we probably should back up and go into like your whole childhood, because I'm sure there's an interesting story of how you became the cop in the first place and then why you were going on.
Yeah. So my parents have been together since they were 16 years old.
Still.
They are still
Oh
together.
my gosh.
My dad was in the Marine Corps. He got out in the Marine Corps and immediately went into law enforcement. His first job was actually with Pender County Sheriff's Office, which is the county over from us. And he quit Pender County Sheriff's Office whenever he went to a domestic call. And it was on a holiday, like I think it was Christmas. And he actually had a guy pull a shotgun on him. It was the guy and his brother were fighting over something at the dinner table, and one brother stabbed the other brother with a fork. And my dad, when he got there, back in that time, there weren't backup officers. And when my dad got there, one of the brothers pulled a shotgun, pulled the trigger on my dad, and my dad was able to push the shotgun underneath his arm. And so birdshot went through his uniform, through his stuff. He barely missed the shot. And at that point, he was like, I have a brand new daughter. I don't want to do sheriff's office anymore. And he went into what's called Marine Patrol. So for our area, that is like a wildlife officer.
Okay.
So he spent his entire career as a Marine Patrol officer, and he's now retired. He's been retired for about 10 years. But my whole life growing up, I was around law enforcement my entire life. If you were military, law enforcement, or a firefighter, that's what everybody in my family is. And that is just what I was comfortable with. So by the time I was in high school, I'll tell you a story. I don't think you've ever heard this story. This is the defining moment where I knew I was probably going to be a police officer in my life. My best friend at the time when I was growing up, she had a boyfriend at the time. I'm trying to be very cautious of what information I actually give out here. She had a boyfriend at the time, and they had broken up. And he was supposed to be out of town. And so she called me. She was like, can you drive me to go get my items from his front porch? His family has thrown my stuff that I had there at their house outside. And will you go with me? So I told my parents, I was like, I'm going to go with her to go get her items. And we get there, and lo and behold, the boyfriend is actually there after he said he was not. And he came outside of the car to my car, and my best friend, she was seatbelted in my car. He was trying to open the window. Her window was down, and he was actually trying to pull her through the windshield of my passenger side of my car.
Oh my gosh.
So me being the daughter of a police officer,
You're
also,
like, I got this.
my dad had always taught me how to fight, how to defend myself. I had pepper spray in my car, at 16 years old. And the second he started pulling her out of the car, I literally pepper sprayed him. And what I didn't realize at the time was his family had came outside of the house to grab him, trying to stop him from assaulting my friend. And I ended up pepper spraying the whole family, actually. So lo and behold, that was like my first like not traumatic, but like experience with like somebody being violent. And I'll never forget, I went home that night, and my parents knew where I was. I was very honest. We had a very open communication with my parents. And my dad was in bed when I got home, and I remember I woke him up and I said, hey, I just want to let you know I pepper sprayed this guy and his family. And I'll never forget my dad. He like came to enough in his sleep, and he goes, did they deserve it? And I go, they did. I said, I would have never done something like that if they had not. And he goes, okay, I'll talk to you in the morning about it. Go to bed. And like, to me, like I thought I was going to be in trouble, but my family had instilled in me so much, if you do the right thing, you're never going to get in trouble. And that just always stood with me my entire life, and I went through college, and my goal was to go to law school because, I knew I wanted to do something in the law related to law, but I realized very quickly that, I went to a private Christian school that was very expensive, and I realized very quickly I didn't want to pay for law school. So I switched it to finance. And then once I graduated, I was like, this isn't for me, and ended up paying to go through law enforcement school. So that is actually how I got into law enforcement. So I spent my...
What age? How old were you at that point?
21.
Okay.
Right
so
at
you're
20.
Still a baby.
Yep. Right at 21 is when I decided to go into law enforcement and put myself through rookie school. And I got hired with Actually, UNCW Police Department, which most people don't know. I don't admit to that one a lot, but I went there because there was a state hiring freeze. Like all the city agencies were not hiring at the time I graduated. And I was there for a year, switched to Wilmington Police Department. And within 2 years of being there, my career went to vice and narcotics. That's where I spent the entirety of my law enforcement career, was in that field. Gangs, drugs, narcotics. That was just, that was my wheelhouse. And I think whenever I met you, I had, there's things called task force officers where local officers will go actually work with the FBI and work out of their field office. And that's where I was. And that was just what I love to do. So
No, I just thought it was because our conversation went into like that they could come in your house at any point unannounced
Yep.
and like search your house. And I'm like, why is she doing this? Like, I mean, anytime, just come into your house and search with no reason, just to like validate you, or like you were going through the process, right?
Yeah, so part of whenever I signed up, and it was actually true for if you were an actual FBI agent or if you or a task force officer, which I was, whenever you signed up for that position, it was actually in their agreement. They have the ability to financially audit you to make sure you're not taking money, and they also have the ability to search your residence without a search warrant. You agree as an employee or in that position that is something you will do. So that is actually true.
And okay, so why would anybody do that?
Because there are shady people everywhere.
I
There are
guess.
bad apples
I
in
mean, I
every
can see
group.
why they would do that, but like,
Yeah.
why would you?
Why would I agree?
Well, I guess because you're not doing anything wrong, right?
Yep.
Like if you're in this job, like you're like, I have nothing to hide, and so you're fine to give up that right. I feel, but I like, yeah, I was just like amazed that night because
Yep.
I'm like, I don't think I could do that, even though I have nothing I'm hiding, but just knowing, but. Yeah.
No, it's definitely an uneasy feeling. I mean, I've never known anybody to have their house searched that way, but definitely being an employer and agreeing to that position, that was something I did have to agree to.
Yeah. So you do as you're doing all this, you're competing in bikini.
Yep. I did, I think 3 shows with bikini. I think I placed the top 5, like my first 2, and then my last one I did not. And I will tell you, I was the smallest person. I had no business stepping on the stage my last show, but I was all natural. I was a police officer. I couldn't take anything that could even be misconstrued as a steroid because my real job would 100% fire me for it. So that was actually my last year competing. Everybody was so much bigger than I was, and I felt like I couldn't compete with it. But yeah.
It was like probably all of our pivoting points who were not going on to the next level were like, I think we're just going to take a back seat and watch everyone else do this, because it got very competitive. Probably was that 2018?
Yeah, I think so. Yeah. And with me, I was working shift work, and granted, there are people that do phenomenal on shift work and competing all the time. It was exhausting to me. I mean, I still did it. I pushed through whenever I wanted to. Actually, that was my goal. But at the end of the day, like, it was exhausting.
Well, we were still doing shows too, like as Clean Eats there. And then you end up buying a clothing, I guess, business from your coach.
Yep. My coach was
shows.
Stacy Pilari, which is a funny story. I sell real estate now. I'm no longer in law enforcement. Stacy also sells real estate down in Key West, Florida. But Stacy had a clothing company called Built by Sacrifice, and
Which had the coolest tank tops ever.
Yeah.
Sayings.
Yep. Her big thing was, the sayings on the shirts were always, we'll squat for peanut butter. We'll lunch for chocolate, those kinds of things. And so I bought the clothing company from her, and I ran it for about 3 years while I was competing. I actually thought it was, I was a police officer. I didn't make a lot of money, and to compete, it was actually quite expensive.
Very.
And I used that clothing company to actually pay for my competitions. A lot of people don't know that. Yep. Every time I would compete, I would actually hold the booth and I would run the booth. And that was how I paid for my show, that whatever weekend that was, because I was a police officer. I didn't have the money to drop thousands of dollars into a coach and running to a show and getting tans and doing all the things. So I would hold my booth and sell things, and that was how I actually paid. Each show paid for itself. I didn't make a ton of money over what it cost me to compete, but it covered
your
my
hobby
cost
didn't cost you either.
Yep.
Well, I remember being in Charlotte and you asked me to come cover your booth. You're like, I'm like, what? For what? And you're like, I'm getting ready to go on stage. I'm like, what? I was like, I didn't know you were competing today. You've been in a sweatsuit all day. I thought you were just here selling clothes. You're like, no, I'm competing. I'm jumping on. I'm like, okay,
Yep,
I
and,
gotcha.
it's funny, at the time, I didn't have a lot of friends. I'm a very introverted person, which is really funny because 'cause I'm sitting here talking, but I really am, like, I'm introverted, and I don't there's not a lot of people I share things with. So whenever I would compete and I had the booth, I didn't have anybody to cover for me. It was I would go, I would do all the unloading myself. I'd set the stuff up myself. I'd go run and jump on stage, and then within 5 minutes I'm back at my booth trying to make money to cover my weekend. So
No, I did not know that whole story. These stories that we're telling, like, it's been so great to hear, like, everything that kind of doesn't get said, until
Yeah.
you have a microphone sitting in front of your face. All right. So you're a police officer, but now you're real estate. So
Yep.
where did that transition happen?
So I got really, law enforcement is one of those things. It is an exhausting, thankless job. I actually did it here in the inner city of Wilmington. Again, my whole career was drugs and narcotics. And, my one goal in law enforcement whenever I was there was I wanted to be the best of the best. And whenever I was getting towards, and obviously I'm no longer doing it, but when I was getting towards the end of my career, there were certain things that I wanted to accomplish. One of those was I wanted to make the SWAT team. They had not had a female fully make it through their entire process and make the SWAT team. And I got really disheartened with the job itself. And so I thought, maybe if I do this, it'll make me want to stay. And I tried out, made it. I was their first female on the SWAT team. And after 6 months of it, I was like, this is not enough to make me stay. We were going into a time in law enforcement where I was getting jaded. I was getting jaded in everyday life stuff when I wasn't at work. You're expecting the worst out of people. And it just, honestly, it's really sad. So, I made the SWAT team, still wasn't happy. And prior to that, again, with law enforcement, you don't make a lot of money. You live in one of the most expensive cities. I was working in one of the most expensive cities in the state, and I was making less than $55,000 a year to do that. And that's not enough money to live in Wilmington. It's just not. So I went and got my real estate license, and I thought I would just help friends on the side. So after a couple years of having my license and working law enforcement at the same time, I got to a point where I was making more money selling real estate than I was law enforcement. And I just decided law enforcement was just not going to be it anymore. So I really just quit in a very bold way. That's a story for another time. And jumped full time into law enforcement. I was very fortunate. My best friend had a brokerage that she had started, and that is actually where I went whenever I quit. So I had built the book of business up in real estate so well that whenever I did quit law enforcement, honestly, wasn't a big deal, which I was very fortunate. So, and in the time of that, I had purchased my first house. That was a complete gut job. And I remember I purchased the house and I wasn't set on quitting law enforcement yet. And 2 weeks after I purchased it, COVID started. I got tired of my job and I quit my job. And the next thing I know, I'm sitting there. I have a completely commission-based job now. I've lost my insurance and my benefits. I've lost my pension. And I've bought a house that needs to be completely gutted, that is not even livable. And then COVID starts within 2 weeks. And everything I was doing was considered non-essential, or considered non-essential, and I couldn't work. So it was a fun time. Fun time.
Okay. Yeah. And how did you,
I don't think most people actually know that.
how you got through it?
Yeah, just the whole process of getting there. So,
Yeah, that's a whole bunch to unravel. All right. So, but you couldn't stay out of the investigation because you did what? Just a couple of years ago. Or has it even been a couple of years?
No, so I think I have my private investigator's license.
You're a jack of all trades.
But it did take me a few years to get to that point, so I do private investigation now on the side whenever I get tired of real estate. That's what I do. I've done everything from insurance fraud to cheating spouses.
Which
So
is probably a whole nother episode of the stories that you
yeah.
have found.
We've had a homicide case like that we were hired to do. So even though I'm out of law enforcement now, I still do law enforcement. And then um this past year I actually got into some personal protection stuff where I actually went to another country and was on a 8-man team for protection of a family. So um
Which was we just see on Instagram you be in India or another,
yeah,
or we just try to schedule a girls group. You're like, oh yeah,
I'm in
I
another
got a
country.
24-hour trip. I'm in another country.
So yeah, so I do a lot of different things, and honestly, my big philosophy in life, if you want to do something, you should try to do it, because otherwise you're going to live your life with regret. And I try to live my life as full as I can, and if it leads me down 10 different paths, it is what it is. Like, that's just I'm just going to go down 10 different paths.
Well, when I think of rebel, I totally think, I mean, because you still the white picket fence, you totally just ripped it out of the ground theory and the fairy tale and all that. And not saying that that's not something that you didn't want, but you just recently got married. So that was, later in life, because I think you did so much in the beginning of that. And, I don't know, we never have discussed kids on your, if you want kids or don't want kids, and you don't have to answer that on here. But I like, to me, you're just such a non-traditional human, and I really admire you about that. So I am
Well,
honored to call you my friend.
Well, thank you. I have lived a very non-traditional life. I never wanted to get married, and I never did want kids. And to be fair, the reason why is because, and again, a lot of people don't know this, whenever I was in 3rd grade, my mom and dad had a baby that passed away at 6 months old, and that I was just at the age whenever that happened that I was, like, devastated. Like, I was old enough to understand what was going on, and it's not even that I so much remember my baby brother. What I remember is my family, my mom and my dad being so upset. And I remember again, because my dad was law enforcement, I remember going to the funeral and there being, as far as you could see in the roads, law enforcement with blue lights on as the memorial for my dad and for my family. And so that happened, and I remember thinking to myself, like, I would never want to do this when I get older. Like, it just kind of stuck with me. And then my mom and dad, whenever about 5 years later, they had my brother and sister. They're twins. So then I had twins growing up that were 10 years younger. And so my teenage years were spent with very young children, toddlers running around that were
You're
twins.
like, hell no.
And, for me, that was my teenage years. And I just remember thinking, like, I don't think I want to do this. No offense to anybody that wants to have kids, but like for me, like I was just in that time of my life. My brother and sister were a lot whenever I was younger. My parents worked full time. I did a lot to take care of them. And I just remember thinking, if I can ever get old enough, like, I don't know if I want to do this. So for me, like, I never wanted to get married. I never wanted to have kids. And of course, at 38, I did get married. But
Another podcast.
That's another podcast. That's a podcast for another day. But it just, growing up that way, it really just impacted how I lived my life. So I do know I lived my life very, very non-traditional.
So tell me though, with that, do you get a lot? I mean, what does your family say? Like, do they pressure you with that? Or I mean, I know our group, we don't really say anything, but what about do you catch a lot of heat for that?
For the family thing?
The family thing.
Yes and no. I think my parents understood very, very early on that I probably would never have children.
Okay.
Again, because my brother and sister were a lot growing up. I love them dearly now. We did not get along for many years when we were growing up. But there was such a big age gap between us as well. But no, my parents, my dad, I take after my dad the most, and I have a temper just like my dad. And he'll always tell me, he'll be like, honey, he's like, it's going to take a special man to put up with you. Like it just is what it is.
Yeah.
And he's very well correct. Like I am a lot, I was raised, I took every trait I have from my dad. My dad taught me and my brother and sister, like, hey, like if something needs to be done, I'm not doing it for you. You have to figure it out. So from a very early age, all three of us, like by probably 10 years old, I knew how to lay sod. I had installed piers underneath houses. I had done all kinds of construction stuff. Like I knew how to back a trailer. I knew how to run a boat by myself. Like,
Which
so
is awesome.
so by the time I was a teenager, I knew how to do most
Yeah.
things that most grown men could not. So, I think my parents, they just know it's their fault. It's all their fault. Whatever happens with me is completely their fault.
Well, yeah, we can always blame them. But I think that you turned out amazing. And I am so glad that you came here and shared your story with me today.
Well, thank you.
And there's so much more to undig in this. So we're going to have you back on. But tell everyone out there watching where they can find you to follow you.
I am Crystal Austin Realtor on Instagram. I had to think about that there for a second. I do sell real estate in New Haven and Brunswick County. If you want a awesome realtor, I'm it.
She's amazing.
Also can investigate cheating spouses, insurance fraud.
You get it all in one ticket.
Also have my general contractor's license. Name it, I can probably do it. Jack of all trades, master of none. Here we are.
You can also find me, evonnevarady, both on Instagram and Facebook. And if you are looking for an event space to have your special occasion, please check out V&V Farms.